The city lights glittered against the dark night sky as Ethan Hale's sleek black car pulled up in front of the Grand Hotel. The building stood tall like a monument of wealth, its golden windows glowing in the rain. People rushed under umbrellas, dressed in their finest clothes, eager to be part of the charity gala that only the most powerful and wealthy attended. Inside the car, Ethan sat still for a moment. He fixed his tie in the mirror, though it was already perfect. Everything about him was always perfect, his suit pressed to the sharpest edge, his watch shining with quiet elegance, his expression unreadable. He had built his name as one of the most successful CEOs in the city, and with that came respect, fear, and envy. But tonight, as always, he felt none of it. The parties, the polite smiles, the meaningless conversations, it was all the same to him. He stepped out, his tall frame immediately drawing attention. Whispers floated in the air as people recognized him. That's Ethan Hale. The Hale Corporation owner. He never brings a date. He heard it all, but he didn't care. His cold gray eyes looked straight ahead, not stopping for anyone. Inside the ballroom, the air smelled of roses and expensive wine. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and soft music from a live orchestra floated through the hall. Waiters carried trays of champagne while men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns exchanged laughter and secrets. For most, this was a night of joy, but for Ethan, it was just another performance. He moved to a quiet corner near a tall window. From there, he could see the rain falling outside. Droplets ran down the glass like silent tears. He almost preferred the storm outside to the shallow noise behind him. While everyone else mingled, Ethan remained alone, untouched, untouchable. He was a man of ice, and people had long accepted that. But then it happened. A soft voice broke into his world. "Excuse me," she said, her tone fragile but steady. Ethan turned slowly, expecting another stranger who wanted to introduce themselves or flatter him. But what he saw made his heart stop for the first time in years. She stood there in a simple dress, nothing like the glittering gowns around her. Her eyes, wide and unsure, looked straight into his. There was something familiar about them, though he couldn't place it immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her small purse, and her lips parted as if she had rehearsed her words but was afraid to say them. "Can you be my daddy for one night?" she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear. The words hung in the air, strange and impossible. For a man like Ethan, who lived in logic and business deals, they felt almost unreal. His chest tightened, his breath caught, and for the first time in a long while, he was not in control. He stared at her face. His sharp mind, usually quick to analyze, suddenly froze. Her features stirred something deep within him, an old memory, blurry yet powerful. He had seen those eyes before, years ago, but on a younger face. And then, like a key unlocking a hidden door, he remembered. She was Ava. Ava, the daughter of the man who had once been his mentor, the only person Ethan had ever respected as family. He remembered visiting his mentor's home long ago, back when he was still young, still hungry to learn. A little girl had peeked out from behind the kitchen door, watching him curiously with those same wide eyes. And then life had moved on. Her father passed away, Ethan buried himself in work, and the world turned cold again. And now, here she was, no longer a child, but a young woman standing before him with a desperate request. Ethan's pulse quickened, though his face showed nothing. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low and steady, though inside he was shaken. Ava lowered her gaze, as if ashamed of her own words. I know it sounds strange. But I need your help. Just for tonight." Her voice trembled, but there was courage in it too. Ethan could see she wasn't the kind of woman who usually asked for favors. Something had pushed her to the edge, something that forced her to approach even him, the man people feared to disturb. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His entire life had been built on control, on making sure nothing surprised him. Yet here was the one thing he never prepared for: the face of his past, asking for something he didn't understand. He looked at her more closely. She didn't wear expensive jewelry, nor did her dress come from any designer he recognized. Compared to the glittering women around the hall, she looked almost out of place. But there was a quiet grace in her, something real, something that no diamonds could cover. The room around them seemed to fade, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it became distant. All he saw was Ava, standing there, waiting for an answer. And Ethan, the man who always had answers, had none. He felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Was it guilt, for leaving her father's family behind when they needed him most? Was it shock, for seeing her grown and standing in front of him now? Or was it something else, something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel in years? Whatever it was, it made his hands tighten at his sides. For the first time in so long, Ethan Hale, the untouchable CEO, froze. Ethan's heart was still unsettled when Ava lowered her eyes after her strange request. The sound of the orchestra played softly in the background, but he barely heard it. All he could focus on was the young woman standing in front of him, a living piece of his past. Years had passed since he last saw her. In his memory, Ava was just a girl with curious eyes who peeked from behind her father's study door whenever Ethan came to visit. Her father, Mr. Collins, had been more than a mentor to Ethan. He had been a guide, a supporter, and at times, almost like the father Ethan never truly had. Ethan still remembered the small office where Mr. Collins taught him not only about numbers and contracts, but about honor in business. He remembered how the older man used to clap his shoulder and say, "Ethan, money can build an empire, but character keeps it standing." At the time, Ethan was young and ambitious, eager to build his empire. But after Mr. Collins passed away, those words became distant echoes. Now here was Ava, his mentor's daughter, no longer a child but a young woman, standing before him with desperation in her eyes. And suddenly, Ethan felt the weight of all the years he had stayed away, the distance he had created from everyone, including her. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter than usual. "Ava," he said, testing her name as though it was fragile. She lifted her head slightly, surprised he remembered. You remember me?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "How could I forget?" Ethan replied. "You were always hiding behind your father's chair whenever I visited." For the first time that night, a faint smile touched Ava's lips, though it was small and fleeting. "He used to tell me stories about you," she whispered. "He said you were the brightest student he ever had, and also the most stubborn." Ethan's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile, but it faded quickly. Memories flooded back, and with them came an ache he had buried long ago. "Your father was a good man," he said, his tone heavy with respect. "One of the best." Silence stretched between them for a moment, filled only by the distant laughter of the crowd. Then Ava's shoulders dropped slightly, as though the weight she carried was too heavy to hold. "He was all I had," she said softly. "And when he was gone, everything changed." Ethan studied her closely. The strength in her eyes was clear, but so was the pain. He knew that look. He had seen it in his own mirror years ago, when he decided to face the world alone. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Ava's hands tightened around her purse. For a moment she hesitated, as though deciding whether to trust him. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "After father passed away, I tried to keep everything together. The business he left, it wasn't big, but it was his life's work. He wanted it to stand even without him. I promised him I'd do my best." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "But debts came. People he once trusted turned away. And the company, it started to fall apart." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could picture it clearly. Mr. Collins had been a man of values, not a man of ruthless deals. Without him, it was no surprise that others tried to take advantage. "I've been fighting," Ava went on. "Every day, every night. But now," she paused, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. "There are investors who want to take everything from me. They don't take me seriously because I'm alone. They see me as weak." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and Ethan felt something stir inside him. Weak. That word didn't suit her, not from what he saw in her eyes. Yet he also understood the world she was talking about. A world where power and image mattered more than honesty or courage. "And tonight," she added, her voice barely above a whisper, "they're here. At this gala. They want to corner me into signing a deal that will strip away everything my father built. I thought," she stopped, pressing her lips together before finishing, "I thought if you were with me, if you stood by me just for tonight, they would think twice." Ethan froze again, though not for the same reason as before. Now her strange request made sense. "Be my daddy for one night." She hadn't meant it in the way people might misunderstand. She had meant it as a shield, a figure of strength, someone to stand in a place where her father once would have. Ethan's chest tightened with emotions he couldn't name. Guilt, perhaps, for not being there all these years. Anger, maybe, at those who wanted to exploit her. Or something deeper, something warmer, at the courage it took for her to walk up to him, the coldest man in the room, and ask for help. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, this young woman who had grown into someone both vulnerable and strong. She stood before him not with glittering jewels or polished confidence like the others in the room, but with honesty. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice quiet but steady. Ava looked up at him, her eyes steady despite the storm inside them. "Because you're the only man who ever mattered to my father. And because when I saw you tonight, I thought, maybe he sent you here to help me. Just once." Her words struck Ethan harder than any business deal ever could. For years, he had built walls around himself, shutting out the world, believing he needed no one and no one needed him. Yet here she was, reminding him of the one man he had admired most and asking him to be something more than just a cold CEO. He inhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. This was not a deal he could calculate, not a contract he could analyze. This was something entirely different, something human. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hale felt the walls around his heart begin to tremble. The music inside the ballroom shifted to a softer tune, but Ethan hardly noticed. His gaze remained fixed on Ava, who stood before him with her quiet determination. Her words replayed in his mind, words that struck deeper than he expected. She had asked for his help, not with money or influence directly, but with something even harder to give, his presence. "Tell me everything," Ethan said finally, his voice steady, though inside he felt unsettled. "I want to understand." Ava took a small breath, as if gathering courage. "After father passed away, I was left with his company. It wasn't large, but it was his pride. He believed in honest work, in fair deals, and he kept it alive with his principles. But when he was gone, those who smiled at him suddenly turned away from me." Her hands twisted together as she spoke, not from weakness but from the weight of carrying too much alone. "I tried. I really did. I took over his desk, I met with his clients, I signed the contracts, but they didn't see me as someone who could handle it. They saw me as a girl with no power, no protection. Some even said it directly, you should sell. A company like this is not for someone like you." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew exactly the kind of people she was talking about, predators in expensive suits, who smiled on the surface but cared only about taking advantage of someone weaker. He had dealt with them his whole career. In truth, he had become like them in many people's eyes, cold, calculating, and unshakable. But he had never preyed on the weak. That line, He never crossed. They've been circling me for months, Ava continued, her voice low. Sending offers that sound generous on paper, but all they want is to tear apart what father built. They don't respect me enough to negotiate fairly. And now, tonight, they've set up the dinner table was long, covered in white linen and glowing under soft golden lights. Crystal glasses sparkled, silver cutlery reflected the light, and plates of carefully prepared food sat untouched. But no one at that table was paying attention to the meal. Their focus was on business, on control, on who held the most power in the room. Ethan Hale sat at the head of the table, his tall frame commanding silent respect. On his right sat Ava, her back straight, her face calm though her fingers curled slightly against her lap. Across from them were the men Ava had spoken of, investors dressed in the finest suits, their smiles sharp, their eyes watching her like hunters. "Miss Collins," one of them said smoothly, folding his hands as if this was all a polite conversation. "We're glad you joined us tonight. It's not often we see young women with such bravery trying to handle business. Very admirable." The way he spoke carried hidden meaning. On the surface, it was a compliment. Beneath, it was mockery. Ethan's sharp eyes caught it immediately. Ava's lips curved in a polite smile, though she clearly understood the tone too. "I'm here because my father's company deserves a future," she said gently but firmly. "He worked hard for it, and I don't intend to let it disappear." Another man leaned forward, his glass of wine turning slowly in his hand. "But surely, Miss Collins, you know that the business world isn't built on sentiment. It's about strength. It's about vision. And sometimes, strength means letting go of something too heavy for your shoulders." He glanced at Ava's small frame as he spoke, clearly underestimating her. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He wanted to see how Ava would answer. Ava lifted her chin slightly, her eyes calm. "With respect, sir, I carry my father's vision on my shoulders every day. And I don't find it too heavy." There was silence at the table for a moment. Ethan felt something stir in him: admiration. She was not raising her voice or throwing bold threats, yet her words carried strength. She wasn't pretending to be someone else, she was simply herself, and that was enough to shake the men across the table. Still, they weren't finished. Another spoke, his smile thin. "You have courage, Miss Collins. But courage doesn't always win. Numbers do. You can't run a company alone forever. The world doesn't forgive weakness." His gaze slid to Ethan, testing. "Which is why, perhaps, you've brought Mr. Hale with you tonight. To protect you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He had remained quiet long enough. Now, his voice cut through the air, deep and steady. "She didn't bring me to protect her," he said. "She doesn't need that. She brought me here because her father once gave me a chance when no one else would. And I don't forget debts." The investors shifted slightly in their seats, surprised at his tone. Ethan rarely defended anyone. His reputation was built on distance, on icy independence. But tonight was different. "Her father taught me that character matters in business," Ethan continued, his eyes sweeping across the men. "Perhaps you've forgotten that. Ava Collins isn't weak. She's the one sitting across from you while others would have walked away. And if you can't respect her strength, then you're not worthy of sitting at this table." The words hung in the air like a sharp blade. For a moment, the men looked uneasy, though their polished smiles remained. Ava glanced at Ethan, her eyes wide for a second, before she quickly looked back down at the table. She hadn't expected him to speak with such weight. Dinner moved forward, but the air had changed. The investors still tried to corner Ava with clever words and figures, but Ethan noticed something she didn't hide behind him. She answered them. She asked questions of her own, sharp ones that made them pause. She spoke of her father's values, of her vision for the company, of ideas she had quietly built over months of struggle. And the more she spoke, the more Ethan saw her differently. She wasn't a helpless girl begging for help. She was a fighter. She had been standing alone all this time, carrying a weight most people wouldn't dare touch. For years, Ethan had believed strength meant shutting people out, relying on no one, keeping his heart cold. But Ava showed a different kind of strength. The kind that came from holding on when the world tried to push you down. The kind that came from believing in something even when no one else did. As the night went on, the investors' confidence began to waver. They didn't get the easy victory they expected. They didn't see fear in Ava's eyes, and Ethan's presence made them tread carefully. By the time dessert was served, their words had grown less sharp, their offers less aggressive. When the dinner finally ended, Ava stood gracefully, thanking them for their time. The men smiled and nodded, but Ethan could see the frustration behind their eyes. They hadn't won tonight. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Ava walked beside Ethan, her steps steady though her shoulders finally relaxed. The bright lights of the hotel glowed behind them, but the world outside felt quieter, calmer. She turned to him, her expression soft. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan shook his head. "Don't thank me. You did that yourself. I just sat there." A small laugh escaped her lips, surprising him. "You did more than that. You reminded them I wasn't alone. And, you reminded me too." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't just her father's daughter anymore. She was her own person, strong, determined, and far braver than most people in that ballroom. For years, Ethan had thought he understood what strength meant. Tonight, watching Ava fight with grace and courage, he realized he had been wrong. The city was quiet that night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean under the glow of streetlights. Ethan's car waited outside the Grand Hotel, but neither he nor Ava hurried to enter it. They stood at the top of the steps for a moment, watching the world around them, both lost in their thoughts. Ava finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight of relief. "I thought I was going to lose everything tonight," she admitted. "But I didn't. And that's because of you." Ethan turned to her, his expression calm but his eyes softer than before. "You didn't lose because you didn't give up," he said. "Not because of me. You stood your ground. I only sat there and reminded them you weren't alone. The rest you did it yourself." Ava looked at him, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. It wasn't the kind of smile meant to please others. It was real, filled with quiet gratitude. "Still," she whispered, "thank you. My father trusted you for a reason. Tonight, I finally understood why." Her words touched something inside Ethan. For years, he had lived with the belief that relationships only led to disappointment, that caring for someone meant exposing himself to pain. He had shut himself away, building walls so high that no one could climb over them. But Ava had slipped through not by force, but simply by being herself. They walked slowly toward the car. The driver opened the door, but Ethan lifted a hand. "Give us a moment," he said, and the driver stepped back respectfully. Ava turned to face him. "So, what happens now?" she asked. Her voice carried curiosity, maybe even a little fear, as though she wasn't sure if this night had been only a momentary favor or the beginning of something more. Ethan studied her carefully. For years, his decisions had been quick, logical, and firm. But this was different. This wasn't about contracts or profits. This was about life, about people, about something his heart had long forgotten. "What happens now," Ethan said slowly, "is up to you. You've proven you can stand on your own. You don't need me. But if you want my help not as a shield, not as someone to fight your battles, but as a partner in keeping your father's dream alive I'll be there. Ava blinked, her eyes glistening, though no tears fell. She didn't cry easily, he could see that. She had learned to be strong, to carry her struggles in silence. But in that moment, her heart softened. I'd like that, she said, her voice quiet but certain. I'd like that very much. The air between them shifted. It wasn't heavy anymore, nor was it filled with fear. It was lighter, calmer, as though both of them had finally set down a burden they had been carrying alone for too long. They entered the car, and as the vehicle moved through the city, Ava leaned back against the seat, her eyes drifting to the window. The lights of the city reflected in the glass, but her mind was elsewhere. I used to watch you when you came to visit my father, she said softly. You were so determined, so focused. I remember thinking, he's going to do something big one day. And you did. But, she hesitated, then continued, I also remember how my father used to worry about you. He said you were building your world too high, too far away from people. He said he wished you'd let yourself have a family, or at least someone to care for. Ethan's gaze remained fixed ahead, but her words pierced deeper than she could imagine. Mr. Collins had been the only person who saw through him, who knew what he lacked beyond success. And now, years later, his daughter was speaking the same truth. Your father was right, Ethan said at last. His voice was low, almost a confession. I built walls. I told myself it was strength. But tonight, I realized strength looks different. It looks like what you did, facing people who underestimated you and proving them wrong without losing yourself. Ava turned her head toward him, studying his profile in the dim light. For the first time, she saw not the untouchable CEO the world feared, but a man tired, thoughtful, human. The car eventually stopped in front of her modest apartment building. Compared to Ethan's grand lifestyle, it was small, almost ordinary. Yet he respected it. This was where she fought her battles, where she carried her father's dream each day. She stepped out of the car, but before she closed the door, she looked at him one more time. Tonight, you weren't the lonely man everyone thinks you are, she said softly. Tonight, you were, my father's friend again. And mine too. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He only nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. Then she closed the door gently, and the car pulled away. As the city passed by outside, Ethan leaned back in his seat, his thoughts swirling. For so long, his life had been about numbers, deals, and victories that meant little in the end. But tonight had been different. Tonight, he had felt something real. He thought about Ava's courage, about her quiet strength, about the way she carried her father's legacy with dignity. And he realized something he hadn't dared admit before: he didn't want to return to his empty penthouse and his silent world. The loneliness that once felt like safety now felt unbearable. For the first time in years, Ethan Hale wanted more. Not more wealth or more power, but more connection. More moments like tonight. The next morning, newspapers would speak of the gala, of the powerful names who attended, of the business deals whispered about in corners. But they would never know about the quiet victory at one dinner table, the moment when a young woman stood up for her father's legacy, and a lonely CEO remembered what it meant to feel alive again. For Ava, it was the night she proved to the world and to herself that she was more than capable of carrying her father's dream. For Ethan, it was the night his frozen heart finally began to thaw. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning.